The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was the crimson silk of my wedding canopy, the same one I had embroidered with trembling fingers 17 years ago. The same one I had stared at for 6 years while Wei Yuan took concubines and beat them bloody, while my brother sent letters asking for favors I could not give, while my mother wrote to remind me that my duty was to endure. I had endured until I couldn't. I had died in a shed, blind and mute, with rats gnawing at my heels. But I could see now. I could feel my own teeth, whole and strong. I could taste the morning air, sweet and clean, not the rot of my own decay. I shot up from the bed and stumbled to the bronze mirror. My face stared back at me, unlined, unmarked, the cheeks full and the eyes bright. I touched my own reflection and felt the warmth of living flesh beneath my fingers. My hands were smooth, the scars from scrubbing Wei Yuan's floors gone, the calluses from the kitchens erased. I was 17 again. I was 17, and the wedding drums were already beating at the gate. My lady, the palanquin is here. The maid's voice sliced through my shock. I turned to see little Chun, the same girl who had helped me dress on that cursed morning, the same girl who had later been sold to a brothel when Wei Yuan grew bored of her face. She was smiling, her cheeks round with youth, her hands clutching a pair of red silk shoes. She had no idea what awaited her. No one did except me. I grabbed Chun by the shoulders and pushed her out the door. Go to the kitchen. Hide under the flour sacks. Do not come out until I send for you. She gaped at me. But my lady, the ceremony, go now. I slammed the door and bolted it. My hands were shaking, but my mind was racing faster than it ever had in 6 years of servitude. I remembered everything. I remembered my mother's cold smile as she fastened my veil. I remembered my father's booming voice telling me I was privileged to marry into the Wei clan. I remembered my brother Mingzhi, who had stood there holding his new official robes, the ones I had paid for with my freedom. They had sold me like a sack of grain, and I had let them. I had walked into that palanquin and never walked out again. Not this time. I threw open my wardrobe and shoved aside the wedding gown, all that heavy silk and gold thread that had felt like a cage. I grabbed the plainest dress I owned, a gray cotton thing I wore to visit the temple. I pulled it over my head as the pounding on my door began. Open this door at once. My mother. I knew that voice like I knew the taste of my own tears. I didn't answer. I tied my hair back in a simple knot, snatched my mother's spare key from under the incense burner, and unlocked the window that faced the back garden. The koi pond sparkled below, full of fat orange fish that my father used to feed with his morning bread. I didn't think. I just climbed over the sill and dropped. The water was colder than I remembered. I surfaced gasping, my clothes soaked and clinging, my mother's shrieks echoing from the house. I scrambled out of the pond and ran through the herb garden, trampling the ginseng my father had spent a fortune cultivating. I heard him shouting now, his voice thick with rage, and the heavy footfalls of servants running to cut me off. I knew this garden better than anyone. I had hidden in its corners as a girl, reading stolen books and dreaming of a life beyond these walls. I ducked behind the rockery and slipped through the gap in the wall that led to the alley behind the kitchen. I had squeezed through it 1,000 times as a child, and I still fit. The alley smelled of rotting vegetables and chamber pots. I ran along the wall, past the back gates of the neighboring houses, until I reached the main street. The drumming was louder now. I could see the Wei clan's procession in the distance, red banners, red palanquin, red everything. The color of blood and celebration. The color they had painted my life with. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring the angry shouts and shoves. I had to get as far from that procession as I could. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The city sprawled before me, its streets tangled and smoky, filled with merchants and beggars and officials in their sedan chairs. It was the same city I had died in, but now it felt like a battlefield. I turned a corner and ran straight into a meat vendor's stall. I knocked over a rack of dried pork and went sprawling in the dirt. The vendor started cursing and raising his cleaver, but I didn't wait to see if he would swing. I scrambled up and kept running, my wet shoes squelching, my breath ragged. Stop that girl. My father's voice. I glanced back and saw him at the mouth of the alley, his face purple with fury, flanked by 2 household guards. They were fast, but I was faster. I had spent the last 6 years of my previous life running from the way servants who had been sent to drag me back to the shed. I knew how to dodge and weave. I knew how to disappear. I ducked into a tea house filled with merchants and gamblers. The air was thick with smoke and the clatter of dice. I pushed through the tables, sending cups flying, and found the back door that led to the storage room. I slipped inside and crouched behind a stack of tea bricks, pressing my hand over my mouth to muffle my breathing. The door banged open. I heard my father's voice, low and dangerous. She can't have gone far. Search every corner. I pressed myself tighter against the wall. The tea bricks were cold and rough against my back. I could hear the guards shuffling around, kicking over crates, cursing under their breath. One of them came so close I could smell his sweat. I held my breath and closed my eyes, waiting for the moment he would find me, waiting for the moment I would have to fight. But the moment never came. The guard moved on, and the footsteps faded toward the front of the tea house. I let my breath out slowly, my heart still pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I stayed in the storage room for what felt like hours, until the voices grew distant and the only sound was the creak of the tea house settling around me. I crawled out from behind the tea bricks and found a small window near the ceiling. It was barred, but the bars were old and rusted. I pulled on them with all my weight, my arm screaming, until one of the bars gave way with a groan. I squeezed through the gap and dropped onto the roof of the neighboring building. From there, I could see the city spread out beneath me, gold and gray in the afternoon light. I could see the way procession still making its way through the streets, the red palanquin bobbing like a wound in the crowd. I could see my family's estate in the distance, the guards still swarming around it like angry ants. I sat on the roof and let the tears come. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. I was free. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was free. I had no money, no plan, no allies. I had nothing but the knowledge of what was to come and the burning desire to never let it happen again. I thought about the future I had already lived through. I thought about the first time Wei Yuan struck me, the way his ring split my lip and he told me I was lucky he had married me at all. I thought about the concubine he took from a brothel, the one he beat until she couldn't walk, and I thought about how I had held her hand while she died. I thought about the letters I had written to my mother, begging her to let me come home, and I thought about the one-line replies she had sent back, endure. It is your fate. No more. I climbed down from the roof using a drainpipe and landed in a narrow alley. I walked until I found a group of women washing clothes in a public trough. They looked up at me, dirty and bruised and dripping wet, and they didn't turn away. One of them, an old woman with a missing front tooth, offered me a piece of bread. I took it and ate it in 3 bites. Then I told them my name was Jiangsu and that I needed work. They laughed at first, because I was clearly a runaway bride from a wealthy family, but I told them I could read and write. I told them I could calculate taxes and draft petitions. I told them I knew things that the officials would pay to know. The old woman squinted at me. What kind of things? I leaned in close. Do you know where Wei Yuan keeps his secret ledgers, the ones that list every bribe he's taken from the northern tribes? The women went still. One of them dropped a wet shirt into the trough. I know where to find proof of treason, I said, my voice steady. I know how to make the Wei clan burn. All I need is a place to stay until I'm ready to make my move. The old woman stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly and jerked her head toward a crumbling temple at the end of the alley. There's a room in the back. It leaks, but it's dry enough. You can stay there if you share what you know. I followed her through the narrow streets, past the beggars and the orphans, past the merchants peddling counterfeit jade and the monks collecting alms. We reached the temple, a ruin overgrown with weeds, and she showed me to a small cell with a straw pallet and a broken window. I sat down on the pallet and looked out at the city. The sky was turning orange with sunset. Somewhere out there, my family was still searching for me. Somewhere out there, Wei Yuan was still expecting his bride. Somewhere out there, the future I had already lived was waiting to unfold again. But not this time. I had been given a gift, and I would not waste it. I had been invisible once, a ghost in my own life. Now I would be seen. Now I would be heard. Now I would burn down every family, every clan, Every custom that had tried to bury me alive. I pulled the old woman's threadbare blanket around my shoulders and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I would begin. I woke before dawn with the taste of dust on my tongue and the sound of rats scrabbling in the rafters. For one horrifying second, I thought I was back in the shed. I thought the dream of escape was just another trick of my dying mind. But when I opened my eyes, I saw the broken window and the gray light filtering through the cracks in the temple walls. I was still free. I was still alive. And I had work to do. The old woman who had taken me and called herself Granny Huang. She had 6 grown children, all dead or disappeared, and she survived by washing clothes for the merchants near the Eastern Canal. She gave me a bucket of cold water to wash my face and a handful of steamed buns that were hard enough to chip a tooth. I ate them anyway, chewing slowly, forcing myself to remember the hunger I had felt in my previous life. I would never be that hungry again. I need to find a man named Scholar Lin, I said, wiping my mouth with my sleeve. He works as a clerk in the Ministry of Revenue. He frequents a printing shop on Copper Street. Do you know it? Granny Huang's eyes narrowed. That man is trouble. He's been asking questions about grain shipments that the eunuchs don't want answered. The last person who talked to him ended up floating in the canal. I know, I said. But he's the only one who can help me with what I need to do. She studied me for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable. Then she shrugged and pointed down the alley. 2 streets east, then turn left at the broken well. The shop has a red door. But if you end up dead, don't come crying to me. I pulled my hood low and walked through the waking city. The streets were already crowded with vendors setting up their stalls, their voices rising in a chorus of sales pitches and arguments. I passed a fishmonger gutting a carp, a fortune teller shuffling his coins, a group of children chasing a stray dog. It was all so ordinary, so alive, that I almost wept. I had forgotten how beautiful the world could be when you weren't rotting in it. The printing shop had a red door, just as Granny Huang had said. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air smelled of ink and paper and the faint sourness of old sweat. A thin man with ink-stained fingers sat at a desk in the back, hunched over a stack of documents. He didn't look up when I entered. I'm here to buy a copy of the Imperial Revenue Report, I said. The one that lists the grain allocations for the eastern provinces. Scholar Lin's head snapped up. His eyes were sharp and calculating, the eyes of a man who had survived by being smarter than his enemies. That report is not for public sale. Who sent you? I walked closer and lowered my voice. No one sent me. I came because I know that the eunuch in charge of the eastern granaries has been siphoning supplies and selling them to the northern tribes. I know where he hides his ledgers. I know the code he uses to mark his bribes. I know the name of the merchant who launders his silver. Scholar Lin's face went pale. He stood up slowly, his hands braced on the desk. You speak treason. I speak truth, I said. And I will tell you everything I know, but I need something in return. He laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Everyone wants something. What is it? Money, protection, a way out of the city? None of those things, I said. I want a position in your network. I want to be the one who finds the information and feeds it to you. I want to be seen. Scholar Lin stared at me like I was a madwoman. And maybe I was. But I had been a ghost for 6 years, silent and invisible, and I had watched everything. I had watched Wei Yuan's captains plan their betrayals. I had watched the eunuchs divide the empire's wealth among themselves. I had watched my own family sell me for a handful of silver and a promise of advancement. I had seen it all, and I remembered it all. I'm going to tell you something else, I said, leaning forward. Wei Yuan's garrison is about to be overrun. His right-hand man, Captain Zhang, has been burning the supply depots and sending dispatches to the tribal envoys for 3 years. The evidence is in Zhang's personal quarters, hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. If you move fast, you can expose him before the next attack. Scholar Lin's expression shifted from skepticism to something like awe. He grabbed a brush and began writing furiously, his hand trembling. How do you know this? Who are you? My name is Jiangsu, I said. And I know a lot more where that came from. He stopped writing and looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. Then he nodded slowly. If what you say is true, then you're more valuable than 100 clerks. Stay here. I'll have a room prepared in the back. That was how I became a copyist for Scholarland's secret network. I spent my days copying documents and my nights poring over the scraps of intelligence I had gathered in my previous life. I remembered every whispered conversation, every careless remark, every scrap of paper I had seen fluttering from Wei Yuan's desk. I remembered my brother's drunken boasts about his gambling debts. I remembered my mother's letters to her sisters, filled with petty grievances and hidden accusations. I remembered everything. Within a week, we had the evidence we needed. I led Scholarland's agents to the granary where the eunuch had hidden his ledgers. I showed them the merchants' accounts, the coded bribes, the forged receipts. We sent the information to the Ministry of Justice, and the eunuch was arrested before the end of the month. His grain was redistributed to the starving villages in the east, and the people hailed the emperor's justice while never knowing who had truly delivered it. But that was only the beginning. I waited until the chaos had died down, then I struck again. I sent an anonymous note to the Ministry of War, detailing Captain Zhang's treachery. I included the location of his dispatches, the names of his tribal contacts, the dates of his midnight meetings. The ministry sent investigators, and they found the loose brick behind the fireplace, just as I had said. Zhang was arrested, tortured, and executed. His head was displayed on the city gate as a warning to all traitors. The Wei clan reeled from the blow. Wei Yuan was stripped of his command pending investigation. His supply lines were cut. His enemies at court circled like vultures. I watched from the shadows, a smile on my face, as the man who had beaten me and humiliated me began to crumble. But I wasn't done. I knew that my own family was still standing, still prosperous, still convinced that they had done nothing wrong. I knew that my father was still committing tax fraud, my brother still gambling away the family fortune, my mother still plotting to secure another wealthy match for her precious son. I had been their sacrifice once, their pawn, their disposable daughter. Now it was time to make them pay. I wrote a second anonymous letter, this one addressed to the imperial censor. I detailed my father's tax evasion, including the names of the merchants who had helped him hide his wealth and the dates of his illicit transactions. I detailed my brother's gambling debts, including the names of the loan sharks who were bleeding him dry and the officials he had bribed to cover his losses. I signed it with a single character, justice. The censor's investigation was swift and brutal. My father was stripped of his rank and his lands. He was publicly humiliated, forced to wear a prisoner's garb and walk through the streets while the crowds threw rotten vegetables at his head. My brother was arrested for fraud and bribery. He was thrown into a labor camp, where he would spend the rest of his life breaking stones for the empire. My mother, left with nothing, retreated to a small nunnery on the outskirts of the city. She wrote to me once, begging for help, but I burned the letter without reading it. I had done it. I had brought down the Wei clan. I had brought down my own family. I had avenged the girl I used to be, the girl who had died alone and forgotten in a shed. But as I sat in the back room of Scholarland's printing shop, watching the sun set over the city, I realized that I still felt empty. The revenge had been sweet, but it hadn't filled the hole inside me. I had destroyed my enemies, but I hadn't saved myself. One evening, a messenger arrived at the shop. He was a young boy, no more than 12, with a bruise on his cheek and a desperate look in his eyes. He handed me a letter sealed with the crest of the Wei clan. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The letter was from Lady Wei. Her handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged with tears. She wrote that Wei Yuan had been wounded in a skirmish with the northern tribes. The wound was infected, and the physicians had given up hope. The army's supply lines were still cut, and the medicine he needed, a rare herb that grew only in the southern mountains, was impossible to obtain. She was begging, she wrote, for anyone who could help. She was begging for mercy. I read the letter twice, then 3 times. I remembered Lady Wei's face as she had spat on me when I begged for a warm blanket. I remembered her voice as she told me I was lucky Wei Yuan hadn't killed me. I remembered the cold, empty look in her eyes as I was dragged away to die. But I also remembered the girl I had been before all of this. The girl who had believed in kindness. The girl who had dreamed of a life where she could help people instead of hurting them. That girl was still inside me, buried deep, but not dead. I put down the letter and walked to Scholar Lynn's desk. I need to send a caravan south, I said. I need to secure a shipment of that herb and get it to the northern front within the week. Scholar Lynn raised an eyebrow. That will cost a fortune. And why would you help the man who ruined your life? Because I'm not him, I said. And I will not become him. He didn't argue. He simply nodded and began making arrangements. Within 3 days, the herb was on its way north, guarded by a band of mercenaries I had paid with the last of my savings. A week later, I received word that Wei Yuan had survived. The herb had saved his life, just as I had known it would. But I had not saved him for free. I had sent a second letter with the caravan addressed directly to Wei Yuan. I had demanded a written confession, signed and sealed, admitting that he had intended to use me as a hostage and discard me. I had demanded that he make the confession public, posting copies on every ministry gate in the capital. Wei Yuan, desperate and grateful, agreed. His confession was posted within the month. The Wei clan's reputation crumbled beyond repair. They were stripped of their military command, their lands seized, their titles revoked. Lady Wei came to my printing shop one last time, her face hollow and broken, and she begged me to show mercy. I looked at her, this woman who had once held all the power, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, not pity. Just a quiet, steady calm. I don't need to show mercy, I said. You did this to yourselves. I only showed the truth. She left without another word. I never saw her again. Years passed. I built a school for orphans, teaching them to read and write and calculate. I taught the girls especially, because I knew what it was like to be dismissed and forgotten. I gave them the tools I had never been given, and I watched them grow into strong, capable women who would never let anyone sell them like cattle. Scholar Lynn rose to a high position in the Ministry of Justice. He never forgot where he had come from, and he never forgot the woman who had given him his start. He often sent me letters, updating me on the cases he was working on, asking for my advice. One winter night, a letter arrived that made me pause. It was from Scholar Lynn, and it said that a young woman had come to his office. Her family was trying to sell her into a brutal marriage for the sake of her brother's career. She had run away, just as I had, and she had come to him for help. He wrote, "She reminds me of you. She is scared, but she is also fierce. I thought you might want to meet her." I set down the letter and smiled. The fire crackled in the stove, and the snow fell softly outside my window. I thought about the girl I had been, the girl who had died in a shed, and I thought about the woman I had become. I had burned down the world that tried to destroy me, and from the ashes, I had built something new. I dressed in my warmest cloak, lit a lantern, and stepped out into the night. The girl was waiting at the ministry compound, huddled in a corner, her eyes full of fear and defiance. I knelt beside her and took her hand. "You are not a sacrifice," I said. "And you never have to be." She looked at me, and I saw the hope flicker to life in her eyes. I saw the future I had never been able to imagine, a future where girls like us could be free. I led her back to the school, showed her to a small room with a warm bed and a window that faced the canal. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. I told her she could be anything she wanted to be. And as I watched her fall asleep, her face peaceful for the first time, I knew that my life had finally found its meaning. Not in revenge, not in destruction, but in the quiet act of helping someone else find their way out of the darkness. I had been invisible for too long. Now I was seen. Now I was heard. And now, finally, I was free. The girl's name was Lin Yu. She was 15, with a thin face and hands that shook when she held a cup of tea. She told me her story in fits and starts, her voice cracking on the edges of her words. Her father was a minor official who had gambled away his savings. Her mother was dead. Her brother had been promised a post in the provincial government if he could secure a match between her and a merchant named Shin, a man twice her age with 3 dead wives and a reputation for cruelty. She had run away the night before the wedding, scaling the wall of her family's compound and hiding in a grain cart until she reached the capital. "They'll find me," she said, her eyes wide and wet. "They always find me. My brother said he would drag me back in chains if I tried to escape. He said I was his only chance." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're safe here. No one will drag you anywhere." She stared at me, searching for the lie. I had worn that same expression once, looking at the servants who had brought me my wedding gown, hoping someone would tell me it was all a mistake. No one had. But I would not be that person for Linyu. I would be the help I had never received. The next morning, I sent word to Scholar Lin asking for more information about the Shin family. The reply came within the day. Shin was a silk merchant who had made his fortune selling to the imperial court. He had connections in the Ministry of Rights and a reputation for settling disputes with gold rather than justice. His previous wives had all died under suspicious circumstances. One fell downstairs, one drowned in a shallow pond, one was found with her throat cut in her own bed. The authorities had ruled each death an accident or suicide. No one had questioned the pattern. No one had dared. I studied the notes with a cold fury building in my chest. This was not just a bad marriage. This was a death sentence. And Lin Yu's family knew it. They had sold her to a murderer because her brother wanted a promotion. The same logic that had sold me to Wei Yuan. The same greed, the same callousness, the same belief that a daughter's life was worth less than a son's ambition. I went to Lin Yu's room and sat on the edge of her bed. "Tell me everything about your brother. His habits, his friends, his debts. Anything." She blinked at me. "Why? Because I'm going to destroy him," I said. "And I need to know where to aim." She hesitated for only a second. Then she began to talk. Her brother, Lin Feng, was a gambler and a drunk. He had a mistress in the Eastern Quarter, a singer named Cui who bled him dry with demands for silks and jewelry. He owed money to 3 loan sharks and had been threatened with dismemberment twice in the past year. He had also been taking bribes from the Shin family to speed up the betrothal process, forging documents and pressuring the matchmaker to ignore the bride's protests. I wrote it all down. Then I wrote a letter to the imperial censor detailing Lin Feng's corruption, his debts, his forged documents, and his collusion with a merchant who had a trail of dead wives. I included the names of the loan sharks and the address of the singer Cui. I signed it with the same character I always used, Justice. But I didn't stop there. I knew that Shin would not be satisfied with losing his betrothed. He would come after Lin Yu, and he would come after anyone who helped her. I needed to hit him where he was weakest. I needed to hit his money. I spent the next 3 nights in the printing shop, copying every record I could find about Shin's business. His trade routes, his suppliers, his customers. I cross-referenced them with the intelligence I had gathered in my previous life, the scraps of conversation I had overheard among Wei Yuan's officers. One name kept appearing, the Northern Tribes. Shin had been selling silk to the tribal envoys, a trade that was strictly forbidden by imperial law. He had been doing it for years, using a network of corrupt officials to smuggle the goods across the border. I gathered the evidence and sent another letter, this one to the Ministry of War. I detailed Shin's smuggling operation, his tribal contacts, his bribes to the border guards. I included the dates of his shipments and the names of his accomplices. I knew it would take time to verify, but I also knew that once the investigation began, Shin would be too busy saving himself to come after a runaway bride. A week passed. The censor's investigation into Lin Feng moved faster than I had expected. He was arrested on charges of bribery and document fraud. His mistress, Cui, turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity, testifying to everything she knew about his dealings with Shin. The loan sharks came forward, eager to collect their debts now that their debtor was in custody. Lin Feng was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp. His father, Lin Yu's father, lost his official post and was reduced to selling vegetables in the market. Lin Yu cried when I told her. She cried for a long time, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. But when she finally looked up, her eyes were dry and her jaw was set. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to repay you." "Live," I said. "That's all I ask." But Shin was not done. He was a desperate man, cornered and lashing out. 2 days after Lin Feng's conviction, a gang of men came to the printing shop. They were rough-looking, with scarred faces and heavy clubs. They shoved Scholar Lin aside and demanded I hand over the girl. I stepped in front of them, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "She's not here. And if you touch me or anyone in this shop, I will make sure your employer's smuggling operation is printed on every leaflet in this city by dawn." The leader of the gang laughed. "You think you can threaten us, little woman?" "I don't threaten," I said. "I promise. And I keep my promises. Now leave, or I'll send another letter to the Ministry of War. This one will include the names of everyone who works for Shin, including you." The laughter died. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. I had made sure to spread my reputation in the underworld, the woman who could bring down a clan with a single piece of paper. They didn't know how much of it was true and how much was bluff. They couldn't afford to find out. The leader spat on the floor and gestured to his men. "This isn't over," he said. "Shin has a long memory." "Good," I said. "So do I." They left, slamming the door behind them. Scholar Lin slumped against the counter, his face pale. "You have a death wish," he said. "You do know that?" "Maybe," I said. "But I've been dead before." It wasn't as scary as I thought. 2 weeks later, the Ministry of War raided Shin's warehouses. They found enough smuggled silk to hang him 3 times over. Shin was arrested, his assets frozen, his trade routes seized. His trial was swift and public, and he was sentenced to execution by slow slicing. I heard the news from a street vendor who shouted it to the morning crowd. I bought a bun and ate it standing up, watching the sun rise over the capital, feeling nothing but a quiet, deep satisfaction. Linny stayed at the school. She became one of my best students, her sharp mind devouring everything I taught her. She learned calligraphy, arithmetic, and the art of reading people's faces. She learned how to negotiate, how to bargain, how to spot a lie from across a room. She grew stronger and bolder, the shadows fading from her eyes. And I grew older. The years passed, marked by the seasons and the letters from Scholar Lin. I built the school into a proper institution, with a library and a kitchen and a garden where the children could play. I hired teachers and cooks and guards. I filled the rooms with orphans and runaways and lost girls who had nowhere else to go. I gave them what I had never been given: safety, education, and the knowledge that they were worth more than the price their families had put on their heads. But the past has a way of catching up. One autumn afternoon, a letter arrived that made my blood run cold. It was from Lady Wei, though she no longer used that name. She was living in a small village 3 days from the capital, working as a seamstress to support herself. She wrote that Wei Yuan had recovered from his wound, but had lost everything else. His titles, his lands, his fortune. He was a broken man, living in a shack, drinking himself to death. She wrote that he had been asking about me. He wanted to see me. He wanted to apologize. I read the letter 3 times. I remembered the feel of his hand around my throat. I remembered his laugh as I fell to the floor. I remembered the concubine he had beaten to death, her body cold and bruised on the same bed where he had forced me to lie. The anger rose like bile, sharp and bitter. But then I remembered Lin Yu's face when she had first arrived, terrified and helpless. I remembered Granny Huang's kindness, the broken temple where I had slept, the women who had shared their bread with a stranger. I had clawed my way out of the darkness, but I had not done it alone. And I had not done it by holding on to hatred. I wrote back to Lady Wei. I told her that I did not need Wei Yuan's apology. I told her that I had already forgiven myself for the shame I had carried, and that was the only forgiveness that mattered. I told her to tell him that the woman he had discarded was the same woman who had saved his life, and that she had done it not out of love, but out of the simple refusal to become him. I sealed the letter and sent it with a messenger. I never received a reply, and I didn't expect one. I had said what I needed to say. That winter, I walked through the school's courtyard, watching the children build a snowman. Linny was among them, laughing as she packed snow into a ball. She was 18 now, a teacher in her own right, with a gentle manner and a fierce protectiveness for the younger students. She caught my eye and waved me over. "Come join us," she said. "It's good for the soul." I shook my head, smiling. "You go ahead. I'm too old for snowball fights." She laughed and turned back to the children. I watched her for a long moment, seeing in her the girl I had been and the woman I had become. I had not raised her. I had not birthed her. But I had saved her, and in saving her, I had saved myself. The snow fell softly around me, and I stood in the middle of the courtyard, feeling the cold on my skin and the warmth in my chest. I had burned down the world that tried to destroy me, and from the ashes, I had built a garden. Every girl who passed through these gates was a seed I had planted. Every one of them would grow strong and tall, their roots deep enough to withstand any storm. I thought about my mother, trapped in her nunnery, still waiting for someone to save her from the consequences of her choices. I thought about my father, broken and humiliated, living on the charity of strangers. I thought about my brother, still breaking stones in the labor camp, his once proud shoulders bowed. They were all gone now, scattered like ashes in the wind. I had not wished them harm. I had simply refused to be their sacrifice. And that refusal had made all the difference. I turned and walked back inside, the children's laughter following me through the door. There was work to do, always work to do. But for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was not running from anything. I was walking toward something. Something I had built with my own hands, my own mind, my own heart. The future was wide open, and I was finally ready to meet it. The letter arrived on the first day of spring, carried by a messenger who had ridden through 3 nights of rain to reach my door. The boy was soaked to the bone, his teeth chattering, but he refused to take the cup of tea I offered. He simply pressed the sealed envelope into my hands and disappeared back into the downpour before I could ask his name. I recognized the seal immediately. It was the crest of the Empress Dowager's household, a phoenix surrounded by clouds, stamped in crimson wax that still held the faint scent of sandalwood. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant, precise, the strokes of a woman who had been trained by the finest calligraphers in the empire. It was brief and to the point. The Empress Dowager had heard of my school. She had heard of the work I was doing, the girls I was saving, the network of information I had built. She wished to meet with me. She wished to discuss how my talents could serve the throne. I read the letter 3 times, searching for the trap. In my previous life, I had learned that invitations from the powerful were rarely gifts. They were demands dressed in silk, threats wrapped in pleasantries. The Empress Dowager was the most powerful woman in the empire, the grandmother of the young emperor, the puppet master who pulled the strings of the entire court. She had crushed more than one upstart official with a flick of her fingers. She had exiled ministers, executed generals, and reduced noble families to beggary with nothing more than a whispered word. What did she want with me? I took the letter to Scholar Lin, who had become my closest advisor over the years. He read it in silence, his face growing paler with each line. When he finally looked up, his eyes were dark with worry. "This is dangerous," he said. "She doesn't invite people to court unless she wants something from them. And she never gives anything for free." "I know," I said. "But I can't refuse. If I ignore her summons, she'll see it as an insult. She'll come after me, and she'll come after the school. She'll burn everything I've built just to prove she can." Scholar Lin nodded slowly. "Then you'll go. But you'll go prepared. You'll take guards, you'll take weapons, and you'll take everything you know about every official in that palace. If she tries to trap you, you'll have something to trade." I spent the next 3 days preparing for the journey. I packed a small satchel with documents and coins and the few personal items I had accumulated over the years. I left the school in the hands of Lin Yu, who had grown into a capable and trusted leader. She hugged me tightly at the gate, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Come back to us," she said. "We need you." "I'll come back," I promised. I always do. The journey to the capital took 2 days. I traveled in a plain carriage, accompanied by 2 guards who had once been soldiers in the Northern Army. They were loyal to me, not to any official, and they had sworn to protect me with their lives. I didn't believe in such oaths, but I appreciated the gesture. The palace rose before me like a mountain of jade and gold, its walls towering over the city, its gates guarded by soldiers in gleaming armor. I had seen it before from a distance, in the days when I was still Wei Yuan's wife. I had never been allowed inside. I had never been worthy of entering such a place. Now I was being summoned, and I would walk through those gates with my head held high. The Empress Dowager received me in her private chambers, a room filled with silk cushions and incense burners and paintings of peonies. She was seated on a low dais, her gray hair pinned with golden ornaments, her face lined with age, but her eyes as sharp as a hawk's. She gestured for me to kneel, and I did, pressing my forehead to the cold floor. "Arise," she said, her voice soft and dry. "I've heard much about you, Jiangsu. They say you can bring down a man with a single piece of paper. They say you know secrets that would make the ministers weep. They say you were the one who exposed the Wei clan's treason and the eunuch's grain theft and the merchant's smuggling operation." I rose and met her eyes. "I only told the truth, Your Highness. The truth has a way of destroying those who hide from it." Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clever girl. I like clever girls. They're so much more interesting than the ones who just nod and smile." She clapped her hands, and a servant brought a tray of tea. She poured 2 cups herself, a gesture of honor that made me wary. I accepted the cup and took a sip, letting the bitter liquid warm my throat. I waited for her to speak. "I have a problem," she said, setting her cup down. "There is a faction at court that is growing too powerful. They are led by the Grand Counselor, a man named Zhao Xian. He has been whispering poison into my grandson's ear, filling his head with ideas about reducing the power of the eunuchs and increasing the authority of the military. He has been building alliances with the border generals, making deals behind my back. He wants to push me out of the palace. He wants to rule through the emperor alone." I kept my face neutral. I had heard of Zhao Xian. He was a brilliant and ambitious man, the son of a minor scholar who had risen through the ranks through sheer intelligence and ruthlessness. He had been the Grand Counselor for 5 years, and in that time, he had consolidated more power than any official in a century. The Empress Dowager was right to be worried. Zhao Xian was a threat to her position, and if he succeeded, she would be reduced to a figurehead, a relic of a past era. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to find his weaknesses," she said. "I want you to expose his secrets. I want you to destroy him the way you destroyed the Wei clan and the eunuch and the merchant. I want you to be my weapon." I felt the weight of her words settling on my shoulders. I had destroyed people before, but I had done it for my own reasons, for my own survival. This was different. This was becoming a tool for someone else's ambition. I would be trading one master for another, swapping Wei Yuan's cruelty for the Empress Dowager's calculating benevolence. "Your Highness," I said carefully, "I am honored by your trust. But I am a simple schoolteacher. I don't have the resources or the connections to investigate a man as powerful as Zhao Xian. I need time and I need information." The Empress Dowager laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "You think I don't know about your network. You think I don't know about Scholar Lin and his printing shop and all the little spies you have scattered across the city. You are not a simple schoolteacher. You are a spider, Jiangsu. You sit at the center of a web that stretches across the empire. I am not asking you to do something you can't do. I am asking you to do what you were born to do." I bowed my head. "I will try, Your Highness. But I need to understand one thing." "Why me? Why not one of your own spies? One of your own informants?" She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine. "Because you are invisible. You are a woman, a widow, a schoolteacher. No one suspects you. No one watches you. Zhao Xian has spies everywhere, but he would never think to look at someone like you. You are the perfect weapon, Jiangsu. The perfect knife in the dark." I left the palace with my mind churning. The Empress Dowager had given me a month to find something she could use against Zhao Xian. A month to dig into the life of the most powerful man in the empire and find the cracks in his armor. It was an impossible task, but I had done impossible things before. I had risen from the dead. I had destroyed the Wei clan. I had built a school out of nothing. I could do this. I returned to the printing shop and gathered my team. Scholar Lin, who knew every clerk and scribe in the capital. Granny Huang, who had connections among the merchants and street vendors. Lin Yu, who had grown into a skilled investigator in her own right. We sat in the back room, the lanterns flickering, and I laid out the task before them. Zhao Xian has been in power for 5 years, I said. In that time, he has made enemies and allies. He has secrets, just like everyone else. I need to find the ones that can bring him down. Scholar Lin stroked his chin. He's been unusually clean for a man in his position. No gambling debts, no mistresses, no suspicious deaths in his household. He's careful. He's disciplined. Everyone has a weakness, I said. Find his. Dig into his past. Talk to his servants, his clerks, his former associates. Everyone who has ever known him. Find the one thing he's trying to hide. We worked for 3 weeks, gathering information piece by piece. I interviewed servants who had been dismissed from Zhao Xian's household, bribing them with silver and promises of protection. I studied his official records, his tax filings, his correspondence. I tracked his movements through the city, noting his meetings and his associates. I built a portrait of the man, layer by layer, until I could almost see him in my mind. What I found was unsettling. Zhao Xian was not corrupt in the usual ways. He didn't take bribes, he didn't steal from the treasury, he didn't abuse his power for personal gain. He was driven by something else, something deeper. He genuinely believed that the Empress Dowager was a threat to the empire, that her control over the young emperor was stifling progress and inviting disaster. He believed he was saving the kingdom, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve that goal. But he wasn't perfect. I found a thread, a small one, but potentially significant. Zhao Xian had a daughter, a young woman named Zhao Qing. She had been married 3 years ago to a general in the Northern Army, a man named General Li. The marriage had been arranged by the Empress Dowager herself, a political alliance meant to bind Zhao Xian to the military and keep him in check. But Zhao Qing had returned to her father's house 2 months ago, and no one seemed to know why. The official story was that she was visiting her family. The unofficial story was that she had been fleeing something or someone. I sent Linyu to investigate. She was young and unassuming, the perfect person to approach Zhao Qing's servants and extract the truth. It took her a week, but she came back with a story that made my blood run cold. Zhao Qing had been beaten. Repeatedly, brutally, by her husband General Li. He had been using her as a punching bag, taking out his frustrations on her body because he was too afraid to challenge her father openly. When she had finally run home, her body covered in bruises and her spirit broken, Zhao Xian had done nothing. He had kept her hidden in the house, refusing to confront General Li because he needed the general's support for his faction. He had sacrificed his own daughter's safety for his political ambitions. I stared at Linyu, my heart pounding. Are you certain? She nodded, her face pale. I spoke to her personal maid. The maid was sobbing when she told me. She said Zhao Qing hasn't spoken a word since she returned. She just sits in her room, staring at the wall. She doesn't eat, she doesn't sleep, she doesn't react to anything. I felt the familiar cold rage building in my chest. Zhao Xian had done the same thing my family had done. He had sacrificed his daughter for power. He had let her suffer because her suffering served his purposes. He had treated her like a tool, a means to an end, just as I had been treated. I knew then what I had to do. I had to expose the truth about Zhao Qing. I had to show the empire that Zhao Xian was not a patriot, not a reformer, not a savior. He was a man who would trade his own flesh and blood for a seat at the table. And once that truth was out, his allies would abandon him, his enemies would devour him, and he would fall. But I also knew that exposing Zhao Qing's suffering would destroy her. Her reputation would be ruined, her shame made public. She would be a spectacle, a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything that was wrong with the world. She would never recover from that kind of exposure. I wrestled with the decision for 3 days. I walked through the school's gardens, watching the children play, listening to their laughter. I thought about the girl I had been, the girl who had been silenced and hidden, the girl who had been made invisible. I thought about how I had refused to stay invisible. I thought about how I had burned down the world that tried to destroy me. And I made my choice. I went to Zhao Xian's house. I asked to see his daughter. I expected to be turned away, but the guards let me in. They led me through the ornate corridors to a small room in the back of the compound. The room was dark and cold, the windows shuttered, the air thick with the smell of sickness and despair. Zhao Qing was sitting on a bed, her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes hollow. She was thin, so thin that her cheekbones jutted out like knives. Her arms were covered in bruises, purple and yellow and green. She looked at me when I entered, but she didn't seem to see me. She was looking through me, at something far away and terrible. I sat down beside her. I took her hand, gently, and I told her my story. I told her about Wei Yuan and his beating and the shed where I had died. I told her about my family and their betrayal and the cold, hard truth of my rebirth. I told her about the school I had built and the girls I had saved and the life I had made for myself out of the ashes. She didn't react for a long time. She just stared at me, her eyes unblinking. But then, slowly, something shifted in her face. A spark of recognition, of understanding. She squeezed my hand, so faintly I almost missed it. I know what you're going through, I said. I've been where you are. And I want to tell you something that took me a long time to learn. You are not your father's sacrifice. You are not anyone's tool. You are a person, and you deserve to be treated like one. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and steady. She opened her mouth, and a single word came out, cracked and broken. Help. I held her and let her cry. I stayed with her for hours, until the sobs faded into quiet breaths and her eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. I tucked her into bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and left her to sleep. Then I went to find Zhao Xian. He was in his study, surrounded by papers and maps and the trappings of power. He looked up when I entered, his expression guarded. You have some nerve, coming to my house uninvited. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I know about your daughter, I said. I know about the bruises and the silence and the shame you've kept hidden. I know you've done nothing to protect her because you need General Li's support. His face went pale, then red. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, I said. And I have a proposition for you. I will keep your daughter's story quiet. I will not publish her shame. I will not destroy your reputation or your faction. But you will do something for me in return. What he spat, his voice trembling with rage. You will publicly denounce General Li. You will expose his brutality and demand his arrest. You will put your daughter's safety above your political ambitions. You will show the Empire that you are willing to sacrifice your power for the people you claim to love. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. You're insane. If I do that, I lose everything. My allies, my influence, my position. General Li has connections in every ministry. He'll retaliate. He'll destroy me. Better you than your daughter, I said. Better you than the girl you let be beaten and broken because she was useful to you. I know what it's like to be a sacrifice, Zhao Xian. I know what it's like to be thrown away for someone else's ambition. And I'm telling you now, if you don't do this, I will expose the truth. I will make sure everyone knows about the daughter you failed. And you will fall anyway. The only difference is that she will fall with you. He collapsed into his chair, his face ashen. He looked old, suddenly, and tired. You're a monster, he whispered. No, I said. I'm a survivor. And I refuse to let anyone else die the way I did. I left him in his study, staring at nothing. I went back to Zhao Qing's room and sat by her bed, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, her face relaxed, her breathing steady. I didn't know what Zhao Xian would do. I didn't know if he would choose power or redemption. But I had given him a choice, and that was more than anyone had ever given me. The next morning, the capital woke to news that shook the court to its foundations. Zhao Xian had issued a public statement, denouncing General Li for his brutality and demanding his arrest. He had called for an investigation into the general's conduct, and he had sworn to protect his daughter from further harm. He had given up everything he had built for the sake of a girl who had been silenced and hidden. He had chosen redemption. I read the statement in the printing shop, my hands steady, my heart calm. I had done what I had set out to do. I had saved a girl from the fate that had killed me. I had given her a chance to live, to heal, to become something more than her father's sacrifice. And in doing so, I had found something I had never expected to find. I had found peace. The fallout from Zhao Xian's confession was immediate and devastating. Within a week, General Li was arrested and thrown into the same prison where my brother had once rotted. His trial was swift, his conviction certain. The military faction that had supported him crumbled, their power absorbed by the Empress Dowager's loyalists. Zhao Xian himself was stripped of his title and banished to a distant province, his political career in ruins. But he had saved his daughter, and that was the only thing that mattered to me. Zhao Qing stayed at my school for 3 months. She was fragile at first, her body still healing from the beatings, her mind still trapped in the dark place where she had been hiding. I gave her time. I gave her space. I gave her the same patience that Granny Huang had given me when I first arrived at the temple, bruised and desperate and alone. Slowly, she began to speak. First in whispers, then in fragments, then in full sentences. She told me about her marriage, about General Li's cruelty, about the long nights she had spent praying for death. She told me about her father's indifference, the way he had turned his back on her pain because acknowledging it would have cost him too much. She told me about the moment she decided to run, climbing out a window in the middle of the night and walking through the snow until her feet bled. I didn't know where I was going, she said, her voice still trembling. I just knew I couldn't stay. I held her hand and told her she was safe. I told her she would never have to go back. I told her she could stay as long as she wanted, and when she was ready, she could leave and make her own life. She did leave, eventually. Not to the capital or to her father's exile, but to the south, where she had heard the air was warm and the people were kind. She wrote to me every month, her letters filled with descriptions of the mountains and the rivers and the tea plantations that stretched as far as the eye could see. She had found a small house by a stream, and she was growing flowers. She was healing. I felt a quiet pride watching her recover, a pride that had nothing to do with power or revenge. I had saved a life, and that life was growing into something beautiful. But the Empress Dowager was not satisfied. She had wanted Zhao Xian destroyed, and he was. She had wanted his faction broken, and it was. But she had also wanted something else, something she hadn't told me about. She wanted control of the military. She wanted to ensure that no general would ever rise to challenge her authority again. And she saw me as the instrument to achieve that goal. I was summoned to the palace again, this time not to a private chamber but to the main throne hall. The room was vast and cold, its marble floor reflecting the light of 1,000 candles. The Empress Dowager sat on the dais, her face impassive, her eyes calculating. Beside her stood the young emperor, a boy of 14 with a nervous smile and eyes that darted around the room like a trapped animal. Jiangsu, the Empress Dowager said, her voice carrying across the hall. You have served me well. You destroyed Zhao Xian, and you did it without exposing the full scope of your talents. I am impressed. I knelt and bowed my head. I am honored by your praise, Your Highness. She rose from her throne and walked toward me, her silk robes trailing behind her. She stopped inches from my face and looked down at me, her expression unreadable. I have another task for you. One that requires even greater subtlety and skill. I waited. I knew better than to ask questions. There is a general in the western provinces named Yan Hong. He commands an army of 50,000 men, all loyal to him personally. He has been feuding with the local officials, refusing to pay taxes, hoarding grain and weapons. He is building a power base, and if he succeeds, he will be a threat to the throne. I need you to go to his province and find a way to neutralize him. I felt the blood drain from my face. Yan Hong was legendary, a warrior who had fought in 12 campaigns and won every one of them. His soldiers worshipped him. His enemies feared him. He was not a man who could be brought down by a single piece of paper or a well-placed rumor. He was a fortress, and I had no idea how to breach his walls. Your Highness, I said carefully, Yan Hong is not like the others. He is a military man, not a politician. He doesn't have secrets I can exploit. He doesn't have corrupt officials in his pocket. He has an army, and that army is devoted to him. The Empress Dowager smiled, a cold, cruel smile. Then you will have to find another way. You are clever, Jiangsu. You will think of something. She turned and walked back to her throne, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. I rose and left the hall, my mind spinning, my heart pounding. I went to Scholar Lin and told him everything. He listened in silence, his face growing grimmer with each word. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. You can't refuse her, he said. She's given you a direct order. If you disobey, she'll have you killed. She'll have your school burned to the ground. She'll have everyone you've ever helped arrested and executed. I know, I said. That's why I'm going. The journey to the western provinces took 2 weeks. I traveled with a small retinue, posing as a merchant's widow seeking new trade routes. I brought no weapons, no documents, no evidence of my true purpose. I was just a woman in a carriage, looking for silk and spices. The western provinces were wild and beautiful, their mountains covered in pine forests, their valleys filled with farms and villages. The people were tough and independent, hardened by years of border skirmishes and harsh winters. They didn't trust outsiders, and they didn't trust officials from the capital. They trusted only their general, the man who had fought beside them and bled for them, and never asked them to do something he wouldn't do himself. I reached the general's headquarters, a sprawling fortress built into the side of a mountain. The walls were thick and high, the gates guarded by soldiers in gleaming armor. I presented myself as a merchant seeking permission to trade, and I was allowed inside. General Yan Hong was nothing like I expected. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scarred face and a missing finger on his left hand. His voice was deep and rough, and his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He didn't look like a corrupt warlord. He looked like a soldier, a man who had spent his life fighting for his country and his people. He received me in his private quarters, a simple room with a wooden table and a few chairs. There were no silk cushions, no incense burners, no gold ornaments. Just a man and his maps and his weapons. "You're not a merchant," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "Merchants don't travel with guards who move like soldiers. Merchants don't ask questions about troop movements and supply lines. So tell me who you really are and what you really want, or I'll have you thrown out of the fortress on your ear." I had prepared for this moment. I had known that I couldn't deceive Yan Hong for long. He was too sharp, too experienced. But I had also known that honesty was the only weapon I had that could work against him. "My name is Jiangsu," I said. "I was sent by the Empress Dowager to assess your loyalty to the throne. She believes you are building a power base that threatens the empire. She wants me to find a way to neutralize you." He stared at me for a long moment, then burst out laughing. It was a deep, genuine laugh, the laugh of a man who had heard many foolish things, but never anything quite so bold. "Neutralize me," he said, wiping his eyes. "With what? You're a woman in a merchant's carriage. What are you going to do? Stab me with a hairpin?" "No," I said. "I'm going to offer you a deal." His laughter stopped. His eyes narrowed. "A deal? What kind of deal?" "The Empress Dowager wants your army neutralized," I said. "But I don't think you're a traitor. I think you're a good man who is trying to protect his people from a corrupt and distant court. If you swear loyalty to the emperor and agree to work with the local officials, I will tell the Empress Dowager that you are a loyal subject. I will protect you from her machinations. I will make sure she doesn't destroy everything you've built." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with new eyes. "And why would you do that? What's in it for you?" "Nothing," I said. "Except the knowledge that I didn't let another good person be destroyed by the same system that tried to destroy me." He was silent for a long time. The candle on his desk flickered, casting shadows across his scarred face. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "Tell me your story," he said. "The real one. Not the merchant's widow tale you told my guards. Tell me who you are and why you're really here." So I told him. I told him everything about my family, about Wei Yuan, about the shed and the rats and the slow, agonizing death. I told him about my rebirth, about the school I had built, about the girls I had saved. I told him about Zhao Qing and her father, and the choice I had forced on him. I told him about the Empress Dowager and her endless hunger for power, and the web she was spinning around the empire. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, he let out a long breath and shook his head. "You've been through hell," he said. "And you came out of it fighting. That's more than most people can say." "Most people don't get a second chance," I said. "I did. And I'm not going to waste it." He nodded slowly. "You don't want to destroy me. You want to save me from the Empress Dowager. You want to give me a way out." "Yes," I said. "And in return, I want you to do something for me." "What?" "I want you to meet with the local officials. I want you to negotiate a truce. I want you to show the capital that you are not a threat, but a protector. The Empress Dowager will lose interest in you if you're not causing trouble. She'll find another target. And you'll be free to keep doing what you're doing, protecting your people, building your army, defending your borders. He thought about it for a long time. I could see the war in his eyes, the struggle between his pride and his pragmatism. He didn't want to bow to anyone. He didn't want to compromise. But he also didn't want to see his people destroyed by a war he couldn't win. I'll do it, he said finally. But on one condition. Name it. You'll stay here as my guest for a month. I want to see if you're telling the truth. I want to see if you really are who you say you are. If you are, I'll work with the officials. If you're not, I'll have you arrested and sent back to the capital in chains. I agreed. I had nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. My school was in good hands. My network was stable. I could afford a month in the mountains. The month passed slowly, but peacefully. I spent my days walking through the fortress, talking to the soldiers and their families, learning about their lives and their struggles. I spent my evenings with General Yan Hong, discussing politics and philosophy and the future of the empire. He was a fascinating man, brilliant and principled, the kind of leader that came along once in a generation. I also started to see a different side of him. He was gentle with children, patient with his soldiers, kind to his servants. He had built a small school in the fortress for the children of his men, and he taught them himself every morning. He had a soft spot for strays, taking in orphaned animals and abandoned children and giving them a home. He was everything my father had never been, everything Wei Yuan had failed to be. He was a good man. And I was falling in love with him. I tried to deny it at first. I told myself it was just gratitude, just admiration, just the relief of finally meeting someone who wasn't trying to use me. But it was more than that. It was the way he looked at me when I spoke, the way he listened to my opinions as if they mattered, the way he made me feel seen and heard and valued. I had been invisible for so long. He made me visible. One evening, he came to my room with a bottle of wine and 2 cups. We sat on the balcony, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, and talked until our voices grew hoarse. When the wine was gone, he turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. I have something to tell you, he said. And I'm not sure how you're going to take it. I braced myself. Tell me. I've been in contact with the Empress Dowager's spies, he said. They've been watching you since the day you arrived. They know who you are and why you're here. They've been reporting back to her every move you make. My blood ran cold. Then she knows about our deal, she knows, he said. And she has issued a new order. She wants me to arrest you and send you back to the capital for execution. She says you've betrayed her by making a deal with me instead of destroying me. I felt the ground fall away beneath me. Everything I had built, everything I had fought for, everything I had sacrificed, it was all going to end with a blade on my neck. Are you going to do it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out and took my hand. No, he said. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to send you away somewhere safe, somewhere she can't find you. And then I'm going to march on the capital. March on the capital, I stared at him, horrified. You'll be committing treason. She'll destroy you. She'll destroy everyone you love. She's going to destroy us anyway, he said. She's never going to stop hunting us. She's never going to be satisfied until everyone who threatens her is dead. The only way to survive is to fight back. I pulled my hand away and stood up, my heart pounding. This isn't the answer. You can't beat the Imperial Army. You can't overthrow the Empress Dowager. You'll just get yourself killed. Then I'll die fighting, he said. At least I'll die free. I stared at him, this impossible man who had seen my darkness and accepted it anyway. I thought about the life I had built, the girls I had saved, the legacy I was creating. I thought about the fear that had driven me for so long, the fear of being invisible, of being powerless, of being sacrificed. And I made my choice. Then I'm coming with you, I said. If you're going to fight, I'm going to fight beside you. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being a tool. If we're going to die, we're going to die together. He looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise. Then he smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that lit up his scarred face. Together, he said. I like the sound of that. We spent the next week planning. We gathered intelligence, recruited allies, fortified our defenses. I sent word to Scholar Lin and my network, warning them to prepare for the coming storm. I sent Lin Yu a letter, telling her to take the children and flee to the south if things went wrong. The day before our march, I stood on the balcony of my room and looked out at the mountains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I had come so far from the girl who had climbed out of a wedding window and run through the streets. I had become something new, something powerful. And I was not going to let anyone take that away from me. Yen Hong came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But I've been scared before. I've been dead before. This is nothing." He laughed softly and kissed the top of my head. "I love you," he said. "I know it's fast, and I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you. I don't want to die without saying it." I turned in his arms and looked up at his face. I had been invisible for so long. I had been broken and discarded and forgotten. But this man had seen me, really seen me, and he had loved me anyway. "I love you too," I said. "And I'm not going to let you die." He kissed me, and for that one perfect moment, the future didn't matter. Only the present, only the warmth of his lips and the strength of his arms around me. Only the knowledge that I was finally, truly alive. The next morning, we marched. Our army was small, only a few thousand men, but they were loyal and fierce. We had no illusions about winning, not against the imperial forces that outnumbered us 10-1. But we had something more important than numbers. We had the truth. We were not rebels. We were not traitors. We were the last bastion of resistance against a corrupt and tyrannical court. We were fighting for freedom, for justice, for a future where no one would ever be used as a sacrifice again. And I was leading the charge. The march to the capital took 7 days. 7 days of rain and mud and sleepless nights. 7 days of watching the men around me grow more determined with every step. General Yen Hong rode at the head of the column, his scarred face set in a mask of grim resolve, and I rode beside him, my hands steady on the reins, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce, burning hope. We knew we were outnumbered. We knew the Imperial Army would meet us on the plains outside the city gates, thousands of soldiers in gleaming armor, backed by the full might of the Empress Dowager's war machine. But we also knew something they didn't know. We knew that the capital was already in turmoil. The Empress Dowager had overreached. Her purges had alienated the nobles. Her taxes had impoverished the merchants. Her spies had sown distrust among the officials. The city was a powder keg, and we were the spark. On the 6th day, we made camp in a small valley near the outskirts of the capital. The men were exhausted but restless, their eyes bright with anticipation. I walked through the camp, speaking to the soldiers, offering words of encouragement, checking on the wounded and the sick. I was not a general. I was not a warrior. But I was a woman who had survived the impossible, and that gave me a credibility that no rank could confer. Yen Hong found me sitting by a fire, staring into the flames. He sat down beside me and took my hand. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow we face them." "Tomorrow," I repeated. "Are you scared?" He laughed softly. "Terrified. But also relieved. I've been running from this fight for years. Now it's finally here, and I don't have to run anymore." I squeezed his hand. "We're going to win. I don't know how, but we're going to win. I didn't come back from the dead just to die on a battlefield." He looked at me, his eyes shining in the firelight. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he said. "You know that." "I'm not brave," I said. "I'm just too stubborn to die." He kissed me, long and deep, and for a moment, I forgot about the war and the Empress Dowager and the army that was waiting to crush us. I forgot about everything except the warmth of his lips and the steady beat of his heart against mine. We didn't sleep that night. We talked instead about our pasts, our hopes, our dreams. He told me about his childhood, his rise through the ranks, the battles he had fought, and the friends he had lost. I told him about the shed, the rats, the slow, agonizing death that had been my first life. I told him about the fear that had driven me, the rage that had consumed me, the slow, painful process of learning to forgive myself. "I used to think that revenge was the only thing that mattered," I said. "I used to think that if I could just destroy everyone who had hurt me, I would finally be free. But I was wrong. Revenge is just a chain. It binds you to the people you hate. The only way to truly be free is to let go." "And have you let go?" he asked. "I'm trying," I said. Every day, I'm trying. At dawn, we marched. The capital rose before us, its walls gleaming in the morning light, its gates guarded by row upon row of imperial soldiers. At the head of the army stood a figure in gold robes, flanked by eunuchs and ministers and the fluttering banners of the court. The Empress Dowager had come to watch us die. We halted 100 paces from the gates. Yen Hong raised his hand, and the column stopped behind him. I dismounted and walked forward, my heart pounding, my palms slick with sweat. The Empress Dowager's eyes found me, and I saw the cold, cruel smile spread across her face. Jiangsu, she called out, her voice carrying across the battlefield. I should have known you would betray me. All women are the same. You serve only yourselves. I walked closer, stopping just out of arrow range. I never betrayed you, Your Highness. I only refused to be your weapon. There's a difference. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You think you can defeat me with a handful of ragged soldiers? You think you can storm the gates of the capital and take the throne? You're a fool, Jiangsu. The same fool you've always been. I'm not here to take the throne, I said. I'm here to give you a choice. Her laughter died. Her eyes narrowed. A choice. I reached into my sleeve and pulled out a folded document. It was the confession I had extracted from Wei Yuan years ago, the one that detailed the Empress Dowager's secret involvement in the border trade. She had been selling weapons to the northern tribes, arming the same enemies that her generals were fighting. She had been doing it for years, enriching herself at the expense of the empire. The confession was damning, and I had kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment to use it. I know about the weapons, I said, my voice ringing across the field. I know about the northern tribes and the secret shipments and the gold you've been hoarding in your private vaults. I know everything, Your Highness. And if you don't withdraw your troops and step down from power, I will make sure everyone else knows it too. The Empress Dowager's face went pale. Her hands clenched the armrests of her golden palanquin. You're bluffing. You have no evidence. I have Wei Yuan's signed confession, I said. I have the shipping records from the border garrisons. I have the testimony of the merchants who handled the transactions. And I have copies of all of it, distributed to every major ministry in the capital. If you kill me today, the truth will be published tomorrow. Your name will be stained forever. Your legacy will be destroyed. She stared at me, her eyes burning with hatred. The soldiers around her shifted uneasily. The ministers whispered among themselves. The eunuchs exchanged glances. You think you've won, she said finally, her voice low and venomous. You think you've beaten me. But you're wrong, Jiangsu. You're nothing. You're a peasant, a widow, and nobody. You will never be anything more. I don't need to be anything more, I said. I just need to be free. She turned to her soldiers and raised her hand. I braced myself for the order to attack. But instead, she lowered her hand and let out a long, shuddering breath. Arrest her, she commanded. Arrest her and bring her to me. I will deal with her personally. The soldiers began to advance, but before they could reach me, a cry rose from the gates. The imperial soldiers had turned against each other. A faction of officers, men who had been loyal to Zhao Xian before his fall, had drawn their swords and were cutting down their own comrades. The gates swung open, and a flood of rebels poured through, shouting and cheering. It was Scholar Lin's work. He had been spreading the truth through the capital for weeks, using his network of clerks and scribes to reach every soldier, every official, every merchant who had been wronged by the Empress Dowager's regime. He had turned the city against her from the inside. The Empress Dowager screamed as her soldiers were overwhelmed. Her palanquin was surrounded, her eunuchs scattered, her ministers fled. She was dragged from her golden throne and thrown to the ground, her robes torn, her hair disheveled. She looked up at me, her eyes wild with rage and fear. You won't get away with this, she spat. You'll never be safe. There will always be someone who wants to destroy you. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. I knelt beside her, my face inches from hers. Maybe, I said. But at least I'll be alive. At least I'll be free. And that's more than you'll ever be. I stood and walked away, leaving her to the rebels. The battle was over. The Empress Dowager had fallen. In the weeks that followed, I helped the young emperor consolidate his power. He was a gentle boy, scared and uncertain, but he had a good heart. He listened to his advisors, he studied the laws, and he tried to undo the damage his grandmother had done. He pardoned Zhao Xian and brought him back to court. He restored the lands of the nobles she had exiled. He opened the granaries to the poor and reduced the taxes on the merchants. General Yan Hong was appointed as the new Grand Counselor, the most powerful official in the empire. He accepted the position reluctantly, preferring to return to his mountains and his soldiers, but he knew that the empire needed him. He needed to be the bridge between the military and the court, the voice of reason in a time of chaos. I returned to my school. The children were safe, the building was intact, and Lin Yu had done a remarkable job of holding everything together. She hugged me when I arrived, her tears soaking my shoulder. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm not that easy to kill," I said. "I told you, I always come back." We rebuilt the school, bigger and better than before. I hired more teachers, took in more children, expanded the library and the gardens. I wrote a book about my life, not as a memoir, but as a guide for young women. I filled it with lessons on self-worth and survival, on the importance of speaking up and refusing to be silenced. I published it under a pseudonym, and it spread across the empire like wildfire. But I didn't stay in the school forever. I had work to do in the capital, work that only I could do. The Empress Dowager had been defeated, but her legacy lingered. The court was still filled with corruption. The nobles still schemed. The poor still starved. I could not rest while there was still injustice in the world. I became a silent advisor to the emperor, a shadow behind the throne. I used my network to expose corrupt officials, to root out secret plots, to protect the innocent from the powerful. I worked in the darkness, invisible and untouchable, just as I had always been. But this time, I was invisible by choice. Yan Hong visited me often. He would leave his official duties behind and travel to my school, spending his evenings walking through the gardens with me, talking about the future. We never married. We never needed to. We were bound by something stronger than ceremony, something deeper than words. "I love you," he told me one evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the stars. "I will always love you. No matter what happens, no matter how far apart we are." "I love you too," I said. "And I will always be here. Whenever you need me, wherever you are." We kissed, and the world faded away. Years passed. The emperor grew into a strong and capable ruler. The empire prospered. The war ended, the borders were secured, and the people began to heal. I watched it all from my quiet corner of the world, proud of what we had built, grateful for the second chance I had been given. One winter night, a messenger arrived at my door. He was old and weary, his face lined with age and hardship. He handed me a sealed envelope and disappeared into the snow before I could ask his name. I broke the seal and read the letter inside. It was from Zhao Qing, the girl I had saved from her father's ambition. She was still in the south, still growing her flowers, still writing her monthly letters. But this letter was different. This letter was a plea. She had found another girl, a young woman in the same situation she had once been in. A girl whose family was trying to sell her to a brutal merchant for the sake of her brother's career. A girl who had run away and was now hiding in a small village near the border. "She reminds me of you," Zhao Qing wrote. "She reminds me of the woman who saved me. I've done what I can, but she needs more help than I can give. Please, Jiangsu. Please come." I set down the letter and smiled. The fire crackled in the stove, and the snow fell softly outside my window. I thought about the girl I had been, the girl who had died in a shed, and I thought about the woman I had become. I had burned down the world that tried to destroy me, and from the ashes, I had built something new. I dressed in my warmest cloak, lit a lantern, and stepped out into the night. There was a girl in a small village near the border who needed my help. There was always another girl, always another sacrifice, always another life to save. It was my purpose now, my reason for being. I had been given a second chance, and I would not waste it. I walked through the snow, my lantern casting a small circle of light in the darkness. The wind howled around me, but I didn't feel cold. I felt warm, filled with a quiet, steady fire that no storm could extinguish. I thought about the women I had saved, the lives I had touched, the legacy I was building. I thought about Yan Hong and Lin Yu and Zhao Qing and all the others who had become part of my story. I thought about the girl who had died in a shed, alone and forgotten, and I thought about the woman who had risen from the dead to fight for something greater than herself. I had been invisible for so long. But now I was seen. Now I was heard. Now I was the light in the darkness, the hand reaching out to pull others from the depths. I found the village just before dawn. The girl was hiding in a barn, shivering and scared. I knocked on the door and called her name. Come out, I said. I'm here to help you. She opened the door slowly, her eyes wide with fear. She was young, no more than 16, with a thin face and hands that shook. She looked at me, searching for the lie. Who are you? She whispered. My name is Jiangsu, I said. And I've been where you are. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be a sacrifice, to be forgotten. But I also know that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be anyone's sacrifice. You can be free. She stared at me for a long moment. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she stumbled into my arms. I held her and let her cry. I held her the way Granny Huang had held me, the way I had held Zhao Qing, the way I had held all the girls who had come to my school seeking shelter. I held her and I whispered words of comfort, words of hope, words of survival. You're safe now, I said. You're safe, and you never have to go back. She pulled back and looked at me, her tears still streaming down her cheeks. What do I do now? Now, I said, you come with me. You come to my school, and you learn to read and write. You learn to stand on your own 2 feet. You learn to be seen and heard and valued. You learn to be free. She nodded slowly, a small spark of hope flickering in her eyes. I took her hand and led her out of the barn. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. The world was waking up, and so was she. We walked together toward the capital, toward the school, toward the future. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I wasn't afraid. I had faced the Empress Dowager and the Wei clan and my own family. I had faced death itself and emerged victorious. I could face anything. The girls squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back. We were 2 women walking through the snow, bound by the same struggle, the same hope, the same refusal to be sacrificed. I smiled and kept walking. The road stretched before us, long and winding, filled with unknowns. But I knew deep in my heart that it would lead us somewhere good, somewhere free, somewhere we could finally, truly live. And that was enough. That was everything.